Hi, I'm Ryan Ramos, and before I begin, I'm going to explain what a pharmaceutical drug ad is. Pharmaceutical drug ad is any sort of commercial that aims to promote a certain drug to the general public. With that being said, how many of you guys have seen a pharmaceutical drug ad? In those ads, if you've ever heard the word death in any of the risks, keep your hands up, please. Which drives me to my main claim. Pharmaceutical drug ads are harmful to the general public. My secondary claims are drug ads are becoming far too common. Pharmaceutical drug ads put the user at risk, and the United States regulations lag behind other nations. Let's jump right into it. Drug ads are becoming far too common. Before, they used to be in newspaper articles, on some online articles, and their main case, cable, like television. But now, as technology is advancing and cables becoming less and less popular, they are finding their ways onto other media like streaming networks with Hulu, YouTube, and any other streaming services that carry ads. And according to the New York Times, they talked to a media firm called Cantor Media, and they found that 771,368 ads were shown in 2016. And this was a 65% increase over 2012. And this shows that there's a rapid increase of prescription drugs growing through the years. According to Harvard Health, prescription drugs accounted for nearly 17% of total healthcare spending in 2015, up from about 7% in the 1990s. Which brings me to my next claim. Pharmaceutical drug ads put the user at risk. Accompanied with these pharmaceutical drug ads, we also see public service announcements saying, if you've taken this drug in the past so many years, please consult a physician because you might be receiving this issue. And one of the most famous examples of this was a dietary drug called fen-phen that was in the 90s. And the drug is called fen-phen because the first fen is referring to phenethyramine, which is a appetite depressant, and then the second fen is phentermine, which is an amphetamine. And with this drug, it was doing as it said. It was losing people the weight that they wanted to lose. But according to the New York Times, the FDA examined 291 patients, most of them being women, and they were all taking one of two of the drugs. And they found that 1/3 of the patients that they examined had damage to their aortic or mitral valves on their heart, which shows that these drug ads can be very misleading. An article on worldofdtcmarketing.com stated that the FDA conducted a survey on physicians and other healthcare professionals to understand the effect that direct-to-consumer, which is direct-to-consumer is these drug ads that are trying to sell it directly to the consumer, pharmaceutical advertising. And 63% of the physicians agreed that the direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising misinforms the patients. Even though the FDA urges the consumers to consult them if there is any misleading conduct in any of these ads, the ad stays on the air until the paperwork gets reviewed and all that stuff, so people are still at risk because the product is still on air and it's still on the market. And that drives me to my final thing. The United States regulations lag behind other nations. America and New Zealand are the only two nations that allow these ads on their media. And even with other countries that allow exceptions to these ads, they have very strict regulations. Like in the article written by the Food and Drug Institute, a organization in Japan called the MHLW, prohibits prescription drug advertising and promotion to consumers. However, disease awareness advertising and promotion to consumers is permitted so long as there are no product or brand mentions included within the advertising. They don't allow the product or brand to be stated in the commercials because that can lead to businesses trying to sell people a product, leading to misleading commercials. In conclusion, pharmaceutical drug ads are harmful to the general public because they are rapidly growing viewers with their misleading and harmful ads. The United States regulations fail to control these drug ads, allowing drug businesses to make ads with their own self-interests. Thank you.
All right, Ryan, the strength of the argument, I think, is in the organizational structure. You tell us what the proposition is, you preview the material, you signpost the points as you get to them, so it's pretty easy to follow these points. I think some of the weaknesses has to do with the proof on the individual points. There's probably good evidence on the first point suggesting that these direct-to-consumer ads are increasing substantially. I think that's fine. The notion, though, that they're having an impact is a little bit more thin. The proof that you have on this is basically that there's an increase in the percentage of the healthcare bill that is taken up by pharmaceuticals, but the link there to advertising is not really connecting. I mean, there's no reason that maybe that we just have developed more pharmaceuticals and people have greater opportunities to take the drugs that are going to benefit them in some way. The link to advertising is missing on that particular point. The argument that it puts the public at risk, the only examples that you have, the only example that you have is Fen-Phen, which is an example from more than, it's 25 years old, and so we don't really have any contemporary examples. And even then, it sounds like the information was, it's not like the, to be frank, I can't tell you what happened. You suggest that they continued to advertise it even though it was indicated to be dangerous, but I know that it got pulled from the market, so I don't know that they continued advertising it after it got pulled from the market. The notion that this was an important issue that was related to direct-to-consumer advertising, that I think is largely assumed. That people were using the product. Yes, they were using the product. Were they using the product because of the advertising? That's the thing that I think you needed to have some more information on, and it was the widespread use that produced the harms that you saw. That's, I think, also something that seems like it's largely assumed without being demonstrated. You had one piece of information that suggested that the doctors generally agree that patients know about these drugs because they've seen the advertising. I'm going, and why is that a bad thing? What's harmful about that? If the argument is that these patients are, well, first of all, they can't prescribe it for themselves. The doctors have to write a prescription, so why is this a thing? If there's an argument that says that the consumers are making demands on their doctors that are unreasonable, that the doctors have to give in to the patients in some way, that might be the argument that you're looking for there. And then the notion that rules in other parts of the world are stricter, well, that I think is probably true. The question is, do those rules produce a better result? Do they have fewer cases of this kind of abuse, of the harms that you're talking about? All I have is some information about how Japan says you can't use product names. You can only talk about what diseases you might be addressing if you were taking care or preventing or doing something in the advertising. Okay, so Are they healthier as a consequence? Did they not have the negative consequences like of fen-phen and the aortic heart valve issues that you mentioned, which is the only example of harm that gets cited here? So how do we know that it's better with those other regulations? That's the thing. That's another thing that I think is missing in the argument. Structural stuff is good. Presentation stuff is pretty good. I thought you had a really good summary of your argument at the end. If I'm just listening to the last couple of sentences, I think I understand what your argument is, and it sounds very persuasive. But if I'm looking at the grounds that you're providing, it feels a little bit thin. All right. Thank you.